And good afternoon. My name is Mark Smith at the American Red Cross, and I am really excited to hear from our panelists as we discuss the magnitude of natural disasters in 2020 and beyond. We have some dynamic presenters and leaders in their own right in business, and I think it's going to be a great discussion to really discuss not only the impact of natural disasters that have on businesses themselves, but then how those businesses are able to support communities in need. So without further ado, let me introduce our panelists. Andy Hilton is the Chief Communications Officer and Head of CSR for GAF Materials Corporation, the largest, the largest roofing materials company in North America. And Philip May, President and CEO of Entergy Louisiana, with over 1 million customers and I believe 58 parishes there in Louisiana. So, gentlemen, I just want to first say thank you for joining, and thank you to the Chamber and the Chamber Foundation for allowing us to have this panel. I think it's going to be a really good conversation. And let me just jump right in with some questions, if you don't mind. We all know that the implications of climate change are here and are now. We feel them every day in more and more severe weather, which has resulted in more severe disasters and a more severe disaster impact on individuals. So as we deal with this extreme weather, I really am interested in how your companies are responding. How are your companies really able to say, this is what we're going to be facing due to climate change, due to more severe disaster, and these are the plans we're putting in place going forward. Philip, why don't you jump on that one first?
Sure. 2020 has been an unprecedented year for tropical weather, record-setting 30 named storms. In Louisiana, we were in a cone of uncertainty. If you've ever been around hurricanes, you know what that is. But record 8 times, we saw 3 different hurricanes have devastating impact on our grid. These events are especially dangerous in Louisiana for 2 reasons. One is because of sea level rise. But the second thing is, we have coastal erosion and subsidence of our land. So that sea level rise becomes even more dangerous. And this is a bigger threat because of greenhouse gas emissions and all of those things. In 2019 at Entergy, we set a new emission strategy. For the next decade, we would be committing to reduce our emissions by 50% from our 2000 level by 2030. This means that for every unit of electricity that we make, it will be 50% less CO2 than the electricity we produced in 2000. We're going to be accelerating that. So by 2050, we are planning to get to net zero on carbon intensity. And really these commitments build upon roughly 20 years of history around climate action. In 2001, we became the first utility in the U.S. to limit its carbon dioxide emission voluntarily. Since then, the company has renewed and strengthened its goals. So for 2020, we are actually about 8% ahead of that goal that we put in place in 2001 to be 20% below those 2000 level. By 2030, we will be reducing those further emission rates. In fact, we'll be moving away from coal by 2030, and then 2050, as I mentioned, the ideal is to get to net zero emissions. We'll do this by enhancing our transformation strategy around emerging technology. So we're doing things like improving the grid that we have, replacing some of our older generation with newer, more efficient generation, so forth. And because we're already one of the cleanest portfolios in the U.S., we're able to use that to help our partners to electrify. So if you're, for instance, we have shore power to allow ships to plug into the grid, and rather than emitting diesel to keep those ships running, they can do that with electricity. So it reduces the emission impact to communities we serve, both locally and then internationally as well. So those are some of the examples that we have. Specifically at Entergy Louisiana, one of the things we've done over the past year, we've added 2 new natural gas fired generations that are 40% more efficient than the units they replace. And so less emissions associated, more reliability. And because they're less fuel being used, they're actually cheaper for our customers. And so we'll add a 3rd unit by the end of this year. And with that, we will have replaced roughly half of our legacy units, all of which means less emissions for the communities we serve, more efficiency, just a better outcome for the communities we serve. And then last quarter, we began commercial operation for the state's largest solar facility. That's called the Capital Region Solar Site in Baton Rouge. And it is a state-of-the-art solar photovoltaic facility producing about 50 megawatts. And we're going to follow up with that. We're currently working through a request for 300 megawatts of new solar resources. And the bottom line is electric utilities play a key role in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. As we continue to lower energy's emissions rates, we're going to be partnering with our customers and with our partners and communities to reduce greenhouse gases even greater. Those regional reductions obviously have great impacts on our communities and will help the overall effort around the nation and the globe.
Thank you, Philip. And I to everybody inside baseball here, I was in the green room with these gentlemen. I said, there's going to be a lot to learn. I'll probably be taking down notes myself. And just right off the bat, Philip, you've already, I of course, we know what Entergy does and the work that's going on, but just didn't know to the level of detail. So really appreciate that. So thanks for the update there. Andy, over to you as well. From the roofing material side, what is your company doing as well?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Thanks for hosting this conversation, and thanks to the Chamber Foundation for putting this on. So GAF, we are a roofing materials company. So we know storms well. Also, it's obviously a driving force in our business, and there's no doubt that we're seeing a tremendous increase in the number of storms. Not only weather events, but obviously you mentioned fires and the Midwest derecho. This year has just been unprecedented from that perspective. For us, I think when we think about the disaster response and how we engage and lean in, we think across the whole disaster continuum, if you will. We have a role to play. We believe in preparedness, whether that is working with industry to establish standards and building design to make sure that the buildings that we're constructing are ever more resilient. From a product design perspective, lots of focus both on in terms of looking at roofing materials from a performance perspective to make sure that those products perform on the roof as they should, and as and are robust enough to withstand even the most severe weather that we're experiencing. And then also looking at it from a resiliency from an environmental perspective, right? So lots of investment in solar. Lots of investment in cool roof technologies, right, with the goal of trying to have a positive role in there or play a role in dealing with some of the underlying issues that are resulting or leading to the climate change that we're dealing with. And for us, in terms of response and rebuild, really that's where our corporate responsibility, our CSR efforts really come into play. We think it's important to be active and be participating again at all stages of disaster response. And so our response has been, or our efforts have been really around identifying and aligning up with the right partners who can help us be agile and respond to the dynamic storm situations that we're facing to make sure that we're there. We can be there when our communities need us most.
Thank you, sir. Now, speaking of communities, and I know how important community engagement is to both of your organizations, and we also understand that disasters impact different communities in a different way. Those that are most vulnerable are at the greatest risk, and those are also going to have the hardest time in their path toward recovery and moving back to a new normal. So I guess the question I have for the both of you is, how do you, or what do you see your role in supporting communities that have been impacted by these disasters through even, we talk about disaster as a point in time, but there's sort of an engagement with the community even prior to. So from preparedness into response and then recovery, how do each of your companies engage their communities? Of course, understanding that, Philip, you guys are there in Louisiana, and then Andy with a national footprint as well. How does that look different across your different communities that you support? To you first, Andy.
Oh, great. It's a really good question. So, to your point around preparedness and response, I think the approach that we've taken is, lot of times, organizations get caught in trying to respond to a disaster, and they don't think enough about how they're planning and preparing for the disaster. And so for us, it's about thinking about the needs of our communities before the event happens. We've invested heavily in certain relationships with nonprofits where we are able to. Good 360 is a great example. A great partner of ours that is really thinking ahead about how do we pre-position the right materials, the right goods, so that we can get them in the hands of the right organizations at the right time to be able to provide the immediate assistance that's needed on the ground. When disaster strikes, through helping communities start that path to recovery, and then really when it comes time to rebuild, that's where we can play a much bigger and an outsized role given the business that we're in. And so we work with organizations to be able to plan ahead, pre-position our resources, work with these organizations to make sure that that they're able to respond efficiently, effectively, and maximize the impact that they're able to make.
Thank you, Andy. And to you, Philip?
Sure, and thank you for a great question. Look, first and foremost, for electric utilities, and we also provide SaaS for utilities in general, we are more connected to the business, just about any other business. And our assets are literally buried in the ground or are poked in the ground. If we don't like the community, or if we think the economy is not where we need to do, you can't get up and just move your assets. So you have to have entrance into the economy, into the communities, and be part of that communities. And, in fact, we have those relationships long before these storms happen. But when we do have a storm, Entergy really is one of those quintessential first responders. We need to be there to help clear roads. We need to be there to get the power back up, because really, until that happens, you can't get back to normalcy until we start to see power returning to those neighbors. But at times like this, we really turn to those community-based organizations. We see them as the critical link, being able to distribute what are life-saving resources at times like these. Those private sector resources, on the other hand, they tend to be more agile. They can move quickly to send financial supply resources to start the distribution immediately. As a result, we look at our long-term relationships and partnerships with these businesses. We lever those relationships at this time to make sure we can speed relief to those communities in need. Our restoration process focuses on getting critical infrastructure back online first. So those are things like hospitals and those types of things. But, a good example of this, because of Hurricane Laura, we knew that timeline was going to be rather extended. We got out and got a bunch of generators to make available to where our community might need it. A good example of that is the town of Sulphur was having problems with our backup generation on our water system. We immediately made a generator available to them so that system could continue to perform and avoided having perhaps a collapse of that system. Now, that's normally where you'd see the federal or state government come in, but because time was the essence, we're able to get in there and make that happen. The other thing I'd note that as we were looking at what we need to do, obviously those community partners that we've had relationships with years are critical to that process. But one of the things we've done is we established a relief fund to a group of nonprofits and so forth. So in Southwest Louisiana, we had a donor advised fund. And what that did for us is it allowed us to make those funds immediately available and then step back and see exactly how we could use those funds to ensure that we were doing the right things in those critical need areas and so forth. So a good example of that. So in this case, about $550,000 made available to Southwest Louisiana. One of those great partners, American Red Cross, and we use American Red Cross because they are able to make resources available immediately to the disaster-affected areas. Within 48 hours of Hurricane Laura, there were tons of foods, water, and supplies being distributed as a result of funds being made available by Entergy and a partnership we have with American Red Cross. So it's really a success story for there. And then finally, following disasters, we place customer information centers so our customers can interact directly with us. So oftentimes phone systems are down, they may not have access to communications. So being able to do that face-to-face during this time with masks and socially distanced is an important part, and continue to have that outreach to the community.
Great response and appreciate it. My folks would thank you so much for our partnership. I want to stay with you for a minute, Philip, on this, and I think we're going to go rapid here. As a utility company, you are critical to any nonprofit or any other support going into a community, right? Whether it's state, local, federal, the first thing we want to know is, are the lights on or when will they come on? So if you could quickly just kind of speak to some of the investments you've made, understanding that huge responsibility you have, and what's been the return on those investments?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So over the past decade or so, we have instilled a new standard for what we build. So for transmission lines, for instance, that new standard will be towers and structures that can withstand 145 miles an hour, distribution poles that are more silent, more resilient, the cross arms, fiberglass to make sure that they don't break under pressure and so forth. And then on substation, those are those places where you see all the large, maybe take a block of area, a lot of transmission lines, distribution lines going into that. We're actually raising the wind load to 150 miles an hour in that. And then for those existing substations, because we have the risk of flood and so forth, we're creating berms or raising the control houses so they can keep that critical equipment out of harm's way. And so we are currently in the process of replacing a lot of our transmission infrastructure that is in the 120 to 130 mile an hour range with these 145 mile an hour standard poles. Now, a good example of how that worked is in 2018, we completed creating a loop around the Lake Charles area with a transmission line with state-of-the-art tower, those 145 mile an hour tested towers. When Hurricane Laura came through, it created devastating effects on a big chunk of our system, transmission, distribution, the entire thing. But for that transmission line and for all of those lines that have been put in place since we put that standard in place more than a decade ago, it was not harmed by Hurricane Laura, despite the 140 mile an hour winds. In fact, that grid became the thing that allowed us to get power back to Lake Charles more quickly. And we also used a new power plant that was just completed there this year. So the combination of those newer assets to a higher standard allowed us to return power to the Lake Charles area more quickly. And that's critically important because you really can't get the community back on its feet again until the power starts flowing.
Thank you, sir. And Andy, similar to that, let's talk about Build Back Better, right? Philip was talking about standards, and I've been in this field for 30 years, and there used to be this conversation of we just want to get folks to the day before it happened, right? But now with your leadership and in companies like yours, we talk about building it back better and actually improving the standard, and don't just put in, 20-year-old technology. If the roof was 20 years old, put something that was 20 years old back in. Talk about that, about your commitment, your organization's commitment to building it back better and to the impact you're having on lives.
Thanks for that question, Mark. I think it's a really good one too. We try to take, and I think it's important to take, the long view on disaster response. I think the sort of when the cameras leave, that's really when the hard work begins. And a lot of times, I think we're fighting. There's a lot of resources out there, in the immediate available to organizations in the immediate, hours and days after a disaster strikes. But then it's what's the support? What's the mechanism for providing support to the long tail of the recovery process? And that's really where we focus our energy. Again, through great partners like Good 360, we're able to get our product, which we believe in these situations is always going to be building back better by the nature of having newer technology on the roof that is built to withstand hurricane force winds, for example. We think that obviously, and we use Good 360 to make sure that our product is pre-positioned in the right places at the right time. And then we lean on other nonprofits with different expertise, like Habitat for Humanity and their rebuild programs. And we bring together expert contractors that are in our network, folks who are highly skilled at building, installing roofing material, and we bring them together with the nonprofits who have their finger on the pulse of the community and know where the needs are the most acute. And we're supporting, we're bringing our product together with the relationships that we have in the marketplace with the contracting community, together with the nonprofit, who knows where the most significant need resides. So, really, it comes down to that. It's just about remembering that there's a long tail to these disasters, and it's important that corporations like ours are prepared to invest for the long term.
Thank you. And in our final question, we started here. This has been an unprecedented year, for the American Red Cross. That's resulted in over 1 million shelter nights in the first 9 months of this year. That's more than we've done in the last, in any single full year in the last 10 years. 2.5 million meals served, 250% increase. So we know that there's, this is not any other year. And I ask you this question as a final question. Resources, the need is clearly outstripped resources, right? It's not Entergy or GAF. It's no longer can be about, writing a check to, the American Red Cross or any other organization to get the work done. But we all need to come together on this, right? So talk to me about how you're engaging your staff and employees and members of the community to respond in their local communities, either for a large disaster or a small disaster. Talk a little bit about the engagement aspect. To you first, Andy.
Great. Thanks for that question. So this is a really important question, and one that's near and dear to our hearts. I think the COVID situation in and of itself created some really unique opportunities to leverage our employees to engage. They came, seeking, wanting to figure out how to connect with the communities, how to give back. It's in their DNA in normal times. How do you do that in these situations? And so, what we've seen is some real ingenuity with our teams, and we've unleashed them to bring that ingenuity to the forefront. A great example. We are based in our headquarters is in northern New Jersey. And, food insecurity has become a big issue, in this community, like many others across the country. And so, our teams came together to reach out and reached out to the food pantry network in the community, the largest one in the community, and said, how can we address the food insecurity issue when it's become so difficult to distribute food in our community? And together they came up with a means of devised a contact-free drive-through food pantry that was set up in our parking lot. And not only did it serve, thousands and thousands of families in the community, but it also created an opportunity for our people to come together in a safe way after being alone in their homes for 6 months, or apart, I should say, from each other for 6 months. And so, it's those creative ways of using a difficult situation and turning it into an opportunity is, I think, really one of the fantastic silver linings, if you will, out of this most recent disaster with COVID.
Thank you, Andy. And do you, Philip, how you're using and working with your committed and dedicated staff to support communities in need?
Yeah, so in supporting communities in need, so COVID has created some additional hurdles in terms of big volunteerism and that kind of stuff. That's part of who we are. But, we're finding a way around that. I mean, you can socially distance and wear your mask and so forth with providing help at food banks and so forth, loading backpacks and helping to distribute food and so forth. But, for Entergy, really, it's more of a more strategic thought around how do we address this. And it really has to begin with education, early access to education, quality education access for all, and then making sure that we work with our colleges, technical schools, and so forth to ensure that they have the ability to train our workforce for the jobs that are available. And that's part of a $5 million commitment we made to workforce development. And then in addition to that, we focus on things like poverty solutions, and we work with over 2,200 nonprofits, and over annually give about $16 million to those nonprofits, focusing on nonprofit, on that is poverty solutions to help the process work through. And then finally, look, when we talked about underserved groups and so forth, we know a big part of that group is at risk because of the storms we're seeing and those types of things. So environmental programs have to be part of that as well. We have to improve the world we live in. And so I think those are the three focus areas we stress the most.
Thank you, Philip. And thank you, Andy. Gentlemen, I greatly appreciate the thought that you put into the answers, as well as your ongoing commitment. The two of you are leaders not only in your own industry, but across the industry. So I really appreciate some of the pieces that you spoke about in terms of how we're engaging communities, how it's a long tail, Andy, in terms of the response. And it's not just getting in for a minute, but being engaged for a long time. And of course, Philip, with we know of the responsibility of a utility company and how critical utility companies are as well, in terms of not just getting the lights turned back on, but getting people back to their new normal. So, gentlemen, appreciate your time, appreciate your energy, and your information provided. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.